Let's discuss this with the gentleman on the panel. Solai Dam, second wave of impunity, and victims protest conditional payout. The story continues on page 6 and 7. Quite a number of headlines. How Solai survivors were duped to sign 100,000 shillings from killer dam owners. That's the biggest story. Of course, there's that order by the DPP for the arrest of the farm owner for manslaughter, to face charges of manslaughter. That's a DPP. And now, yes, the senators, members of the Senate team investigating the Patel farm tragedy, claiming that there are attempts to intimidate them. Now, that committee is chaired by Senator Mutula Kilonzo, and they're visiting that farm this morning. Yeah. Let's kick off, of course, let's start off with the claims by that committee that there seems to be forces trying to influence their work. You say they received calls from even outside the country telling them to go slow on that matter. Is this a common occurrence at committee stage, that when you're probing such a matter, you get this kind of course, we've had people claiming that, yes, there's a lot of rent seeking and all these things at committees of parliament. Yes. But this time around, this is coming from members of that committee, and it's also on Citizen TV as well, them saying that, yes, we received calls from outside the country, please stay away. Is this a common occurrence?
Well, Fred, it happens and happens many times over, and I'll tell you, first, even as I comment on the claims by the committee on the intimidation and sabotage of the process, that personally I've been a victim myself of the same, Fred. When we were, as a member of the Public Accounts Committee, for example, when we were dealing with the Rualaka land issue, I've also received calls. I've been intimidated, and in many ways, sometimes you even meet somebody who speaks in a language that is intended to send a message to you that you might even not be safe, you know, if you continue along that line. And sometimes you have to be very determined to survive. I'm sure my colleague here has his side of the story because he's been in the same area. But I said two things on the matter of Solai Dam. One, it is a matter of grave concern to this country, that you know, somebody or a group of people can have and harbor such a potential danger to Kenyans to that extent for so long without something being done. And then when the tragedy occurs, they still try and find a way to get away with it, including murder of children to that number. And I'll say a few things. One is that, yes, we are dealing with the Solai Dam issue, and it is important that there is a full expose and then full consequences. But Fred, for us to be able to address this thing, if you took probably a ride, let me call it a ride, around this country to inspect, for example, all the dams around this country, you'll be shocked at how many more Solais we have waiting to happen all over. And even as we proceed with this process, the question that we would be asking is, what farm policy, what farm instructions are being put in place to, from now henceforth, regulate such that similar disaster does not happen? You know, when we are going around our political work, and I've been around like for the last 2 weeks on board, and especially after these heavy rains, go around the whole country, you'll be surprised. All dams in so many farms are overflowing. Some you see at high heights. And the question is, if this dam was there for that long, not even first been authorized in the first place, how many more are there? Okay. And what we would be wanting to hear is that there is a firm policy change and instructions that have been issued by the regulator, the ministry, and the minister himself, and an ongoing visible instruction on inspection and closure. And then lastly, on what consequences really should face these people who are the owners of that Solai Dam. One, you can imagine that after the death of all those people, and especially so many children, that somebody has got the conscience to go and equate the lives of those people with probably 100,000 shillings and tell them, sign here, that will give you 100,000.
Okay.
And this is what we have to put an end to. That an investor would go and invest in a place like that, wait to make billions while putting the lives of Kenyans at stake. And I wish the committee well, and I have full confidence in that committee. I was there with them yesterday. We happened to share a platform when they were discussing this, and I heard the statement because I was there during that press conference. And all those members who are in that committee are legislators and leaders of integrity. I'm sure they'll be able to bring this to the final call.
Okay, of course, the same committee members, we're talking about Susan Keheka, the senator for Nakuru, Johnson Sakaja, Senator Nairobi, echoed what their counterpart, the chair of that committee, Senator Mutula Kilonzo, said. Now, Sakaja further lamented that state agencies deployed to investigate the matter exhibited laxity. That means these people who want to influence the committee, even away from the compensation issues, just in as far as probing the tragedy is concerned, they may have reached out to other agencies as well and probably influenced their action or the speed of their action. Back to the same question I asked Senator Kimani Wamatangi. Have you experienced that kind of influence as someone ever? While you were senator, you were in this committee, Public Accounts Committee, Public Accounts and Investments Committee?
Yes.
Yes. Did you at any point receive any kind of overture towards that end?
The overture is just one of the ways through which corruption fights back. What happened at the Patel Dam was a product of corruption and impunity. So corruption is fighting back, and I want to ask my kid brother Mutula to remain tough, because the many years I served in that position of leading oversight in Parliament and in the National Assembly, corruption fights back by first making a friendly call. If you don't accept the terms of that friendly call, they reach out to the members of the committee. If the committee remains strong, they then go to the National Assembly, so that the reports are always frustrated at that level. I have a lot of confidence in Mutula. I have no doubt he'll manage. Now, back to your second question, the issue of institutions. There is no shortage of laws in this country, no shortage of institution to speak to some of the things that happen in this country. If the laws had been applied, if the institutions had stood out and not been engaged in impunity and partaking of corruption, what happened in Solai would not have taken place. What do I mean? There is an institution in this country called the Water Resource Management Authority. There is another institution called the National Environmental Management Authority. These authorities in this particular disaster have got officers who are trained, who are qualified, and who are employed to ensure that they be carrying out regular inspections of dams and other water resources. They control and write reports that reflect the reality on the ground. So what happened with these officers of these two institutions is simply that they looked the other way. Otherwise, what we saw in the name of a dam in Solai does not pass any scientific test whatsoever for what is called a dam. So where were these officers? To make it worse, the people of Nakuru, the locals of Nakuru, people born and bred and educated in Nakuru, people who will be buried in Nakuru, some of them whose relatives are some of the people who are victims, are employed by the county government. And the county government has a role. So as they bring this investor to court, I'll only be satisfied if I see the charges of manslaughter and neglect being also preferred against officials of NEMA and WAMA and the county officials. In the county government, they need not to go very far. Within the county government, there is a department that is responsible for this under a specific county executive committee member, in quotes, ministers.
Yes.
He should take responsibility.
So it will not be enough just to arraign the stock managers of the farm as directed by the DPP.
Yeah, that would be selective justice.
And according to the story on, and this was the biggest story on Citizen TV last night and this morning, apparently the DPP says that according to investigations, the license issued to the dam was acquired irregularly and was to expire in December this year. Yes. Now, back to this issue of compensation. Now, it speaks a lot to the ignorance of the masses, and I don't know where leadership comes in, because several survivors of the Solai tragedy have said they regret accepting a conditional payout that bars them from pursuing further claims against the owners of the killer dam. They claimed they were not allowed to study the documents that stated the dam owners would not accept liability despite the payment of 100,000 shillings for life lost, 200,000 for semi-permanent structures, and 1 million shillings for permanent structures destroyed.
Yes.
Now, is it an admission? Because when you decide to pay out, is it an admission of guilt? And because there's a very thin line here. You decide to pay out these people, then you say we will not accept any other liability. Now, plus, of course, you play to the ignorance of the masses. But where does the leadership come in?
In fact, if I had been a relative to any of the victims and had seen this document, I would have told them, sign and take the money. Because that piece of paper means nothing.
So they should not be worried about that?
No, they should not be worried, because this person, in so doing, was preventing the recipient from being a complainant. But the complainant, the real complainant in this case, is the state.
Okay.
Yeah, the state is complaining that you have killed my child. And after the state complains that you've killed my child, you've killed my worker, the state has a right to pursue the matter and complain. Secondly, I, as a relative, would have a right to also pursue the matter, irrespective of the signature of the victim. They were trying to capitalize on the state of desperation amongst Kenyans, because unknown to many Kenyans, not many Kenyans have ever received 5,000 shillings in lump sum. And to go, 5,000 shillings. If you go to a village and ask somebody who has ever received 5,000 shillings like this, they never get. They get that 5,000 shillings after they have worked for a long time. A 4 months where they're drawing a little salary is when they realize that money. So when you give this person 50,000, 100,000, they think they have got so much money.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
When it comes to such issues, of course, local leadership should come in terms of bridging the gap of ignorance. Because, yes, 100,000 shillings may look like a lot of money, but exposing the potential that these people could actually claim even more.
Yeah, absolutely, Fred. I agree that the local leadership should have had a role to play in that. You know, once those culpable or the owners of the farm, like in this case specifically, and we can broaden that even to capture other scenarios where members of the public are concerned, because as you know, Fred, right now we are having again the matter of the victims of the Gikomba fire, and this has been happening in many cases to those who are lowest in the cadre of society, and local leadership should have a role to play in this. Once you hear that an offer like that has been made, because definitely that place, that area has a local
It must have
chief.
been made public. I don't think this happened without the knowledge of local leadership.
There must have been an assistant chief there. There is an MCA for that particular area. And of course, then it goes upwards. And that is the point at which intervention is required. Fred, if you look, for example, at an insurance policy itself, and that's usually the advice all the time when you're asked, come and sign this policy, the story is always read between the lines, because that is where the issue is. And yes, once you are given that kind of document, and you append your signature to it, as they say, you know, the law is an ass. because then the government, and I agree to an extent with my colleague here. Yes, government has the right to stand and probe and prosecute on behalf of its people or its citizens. But in the face of law, that also constitutes of some good percentage of compromise of that particular case. Because you, the individual who is the victim, have already acceded to that kind of compensation. Yes. And definitely that would lengthen the legal process. Now, especially because the DPP has said prosecute these people, compensation would be in line, for example, after that. What we would be saying is to tell and sensitize local leadership that once you find that this kind of scenario has arisen, it is important to intervene, educate your people, but also say to our members of public, and I agree with Senator Halwale, that not many of our Kenyans have had this kind of money in their hands. You saw when the images of the victims of the Solai Dam were being aired on television. You can tell the kind of status and levels of life that those people have been living. They were living in small houses, wooden structures, and so they may not be, and I believe, Kenyans of very high means. And so once you approach that kind of person with an offer to pay you 200,000 for this, or 100,000 for a life lost, and 200,000 for a structure, that sounds like big money. Now, what we would be saying is, if you compared that, for example, if this happened in another country, for example, ask yourself if this happened in the US, you would hear compensation to its true value would be in the millions, because and that becomes a deterrent, even in future. Because
a quick arithmetic of this, if at all they're paying 100,000 shillings to all the 47 victims, that's 4.7 million shillings. 4.7 million, yeah. If they're paying 200,000 for each structure, let's say there are about 40 structures, semi-permanent structures, that's about 8 million shillings. And then maybe about, 10 permanent structures, it's about 10 million. This comes to 22 million shillings in total for such a thing. I'm sure even if at all there was insurance covering that particular structure, it cannot be this low.
In fact, there is room.
And this is just a higher estimation. I'm sure it must be low.
There's room, and I think the DPP understands this better than me. This document by itself, the one Wamatangi signed, it should also be evidence for a further charge.
It's an admission
of blackmail. These people should be charged with blackmail. They blackmailed the victims, and because the victims needed that money to go and buy blankets, to go and buy food, to go and pay hospital bills, they accepted that money. They were blackmailed into it, so they should be charged further. Look, in the US, if you sprain your ankle when you're walking downstairs, and then you complain, and they bring engineers, and engineers confirm that there's something structurally wrong with those stairs, people are awarded millions of dollars just for spraining the ankle, because systems work in the US. Here, you can still claim those millions, but the guy who will be brought to investigate will say that structurally there's nothing wrong with those stairs, when actually there's everything wrong with them.